Salve and welcome. Today we are in John chapter 2, taking a look at verse 22 and finishing off this paragraph. Here is our rubric, everything that we're looking for as we go through the text. Let's get started. Cum ergo resurrexiset mortuis recordati sunt discipuli eius, quia hoc dicebat et crediderunt scripturae et sermoni quem dixit Jesus. And that's as far as we're going to go today. We want to find our verb first, so those two don't work. However, this one does, and immediately we should look at it and go, there's something off about this. And what that is, this ISSE there, which is something that I don't think we've seen very often. But this should be an immediate warning to us that we've got something special going on. That and the fact that we've got cum without a noun after it, or an adjective. So this is, without the T, our perfect infinitive. However, with the T, this becomes the pluperfect subjunctive, just as the surgo, I want to say that's the normal one, resurgo, so resurgere would be the present infinitive, and resurgeret would be our imperfect subjunctive. The pluperfect subjunctive and the imperfect subjunctive form the same way. They take the infinitive of the primary tense, the present for the imperfect case, and the perfect for the pluperfect case. And they use that as the stem to make the subjunctive. So yeah, it's pretty cool to see that. That's going to be third person, singular, pluperfect, active, and subjunctive. Always nice and clear. So now we want to take a look back at the beginning of the verse and figure out, well, what type of subjunctive clause is this? And we find cum, it's a cum clause, because cum doesn't have any nouns or adjectives to modify. I always love it when we run into these things, and I also always hate it, because cum is a bear. Ergo means therefore. Get that out of the way. Now we need to figure out, well, which version of cum do we need? We have the temporal cum, which we actually only really ever find with indicative, and I realized that actually only really way too many words. There, just a little excited to run into one of these again, especially the pluperfect there. So it can't be a temporal cum clause because this is subjunctive and not indicative. We have the circumstantial, which we would translate when, just telling us the circumstances around which the main action is occurring. We have the causal, because, and then we have the concessive, although. So we want to try all three of them. However, we need more context in this clause before we can figure out which one of those. So moving on, prepositional phrase right there. Takes the ablative always. We find mortuis. This could be genitive singular or it could be ablative plural. Looking ahead, we've got a verb right here, recordati with sunt, so this has to be ablative, therefore a first and second declension. Plural. And since we can't tell the gender specifically, it's probably going to be masculine. Masculine. From, showing separation or possibly origin. Dead. Moving on. Recordati sunt. Sunt here is third person plural. However, as we saw beforehand with this verb, these two together at the periphrastic phrase tell us that this is a perfect passive. In this case, with the long I, third person plural, masculine, perfect, pass. Indicative. Now we want to find a subject to go with it that's also plural, and we find that in discipuli, which also has that I right there. So, disciples remembered, and now that they remembered, I remember that this is not passive. It is deponent. Sorry about that. Okay. Disciples remembered. Eius, you've seen that many times before. Don't need to parse it. His kuya, this would mean that. So this is going to tell us what they remembered. And I don't, let's go ahead and finish this before we come back to figuring out this clause. That, dicebat, our verb, bombasbat, third person singular, is going to be the same thing as that. Don't need to parse it. This means it's also the same translations and the same issues with translating it. I'm going to leave that blank and rely on those three. Hoc from hic haec hoc. Since Jesus is going to be our subject here, we don't have him mentioned again until right there. But this one's going to have to be accusative, singular, neuter. That this, one of those three, et, and credederunt. Erunt is our third person, plural, perfect, active, indicative. They, the disciples again as our subject, believed, trusted. And then, taking a look ahead, scripturae. Credo is going to take the dative as its object. So while we know this could be genitive, dative is the one that makes the most sense because of what the verb wants. And as we take a look at what it's connected to with this et sermoni, this comes from sermo, sermonis, so this is a third and the I has to be dative. Both of these together. Dative, don't need to write that. Singular, feminine, and dative, singular, masculine. Scriptures, in this case just scripture, or writing, and saying, or sermon. Looking ahead, quem from qui, quae, quod. Quem has to be masculine. Qui, quis, qui, quem, quo. This would refer back to sermon, because sermon is also masculine. In this case, though, it's going to be accusative, singular, masculine. Which, dixit, we've seen this one many times before, don't need to parse it. Said, again, we've seen many times before, nominative, Jesus as our subject. So there now we have the full context of this passage, and we can try the different ones out. Circumstantial. When, therefore, he had risen from dead, disciples remembered that, blah, blah, blah. Causal. Because, therefore, he had risen from the dead, the disciples remembered, blah, blah, blah. Concessive. Although, therefore, he had risen from the dead, disciples remembered, blah, blah, blah. Concessive clearly doesn't work. Causal also doesn't work because the time that we're talking about here in this passage is long before Jesus' crucifixion. So if he hasn't been crucified, he can't have risen yet, according to the time frame we're working with. So concessive and causal don't work. Temporal already doesn't work because it has to have the indicative. So circumstantial is the only one left. Therefore, when, that very confusing word which looks like it's temporal even though it's not. Circumstantial, had, translated like an indicative. I guess it would be, risen. It's active. And there we go. Now we can read it in its own context and finish off this paragraph. When, therefore, he being Jesus, had risen from dead, his disciples remembered that he was saying this, used to say this, said this, and they believed Scripture and saying which Jesus said. There we go. Now from verse 13. Voice is starting to run out of power. And Passover of Jews was near, and Jesus ascended to Jerusalem and found in temple those selling oxen and sheep and doves and money changers sitting. And when he, capitalized, had made a sort of whip from cord, he threw out all from temple, sheep also and oxen, and he poured out small change of money changers and overturned tables. And To them who were selling doves, he said, "Take away those despicable things from here, and don't make house, I should write that down there, house of my Father, house of business." Truly, disciples remembered, his disciples, that it is written, "Zeal of your house consumes me." Therefore, Jews responded and said to him, "What sign do you show to us that you do these things?" Jesus responded and said to them, "Break up this temple, and in 3 days I shall raise it." In verse 20. Therefore, Jews said, "This," it's such a separation, "temple has been constructed, was built in 46 years, and you shall raise it in 3 days?" But that one used to speak, spoke about a temple of his own body. When therefore he had risen from dead, his disciples remembered that he was said this, and they believed Scripture and saying which Jesus said. And there we have it. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope taking a look at this has been helpful for you, and I hope you have a good day. Wale.
Hey, not asleep yet? That's okay. I've got tons of other equally sleep-inducing videos for you to watch. Check them out.